You've pumped gas 1,000 times. You've stood there in the cold, watching the numbers spin, half annoyed, half bored. And not once, not a single time, did you stop and ask the one question that actually matters. Who's getting rich off this? Because someone owns that station. Someone bought the land, sank the tanks, hung the sign. And every driver in America quietly assumes that person is printing money. Gas always sells. Cars always need it. It's the safest business on earth, right? Here's the number that breaks that assumption. On a gallon of gas, after every single cost is paid, the station owner keeps a few cents. Not a few dollars. Cents. Sometimes less than a nickel. So how does anyone survive selling a product that barely makes money? They don't. Not the way you think. The thing with the station's name on the sign, the fuel itself, is the single worst earning product on the entire property. And by the end of this video, you will never look at a gas station the same way again. There's also one hidden cost, buried under that concrete you're standing on, that can wipe out years of profit in a single night. Most owners never see it coming. We'll get to it. Max, let's open the black box. Think about a doorbell for a second. Nobody buys a house because they love the doorbell. The doorbell isn't the point. It's the thing that gets you to the door so you'll step inside, where everything actually happens. That right there is gasoline. The gas is the doorbell. The store behind it is the house. The entire business is built around one quiet idea. Use the fuel to pull you off the road, and make the real money once you're standing inside. Keep that picture in your head for the whole video. The doorbell and the house. Because the moment you see it, the strange, upside-down economics of this business suddenly clicks into place. Everything a station does starts to make sense. The price war out front, the coffee machine inside, all of it. So let's walk through the house, room by room. I don't own a gas station, but I've spent an unreasonable amount of time inside the numbers of the ones people do own. The industry reports, the fuel margin data, the environmental filings almost nobody reads. And here's what those numbers say. Almost everything the average driver believes about this business is backwards. Not slightly off. Backwards. The part they think is the business is the bait. The part they ignore is where the money actually lives. I read this stuff so you don't have to. So let's go through it the way a real owner is forced to. Starting with the brutal cost of just opening the doors. Before you sell a single gallon, you are already deep in the hole. And not in the normal way most businesses start out in the hole. Start with the tanks. Gasoline doesn't sit in a shed out back. It sits in massive steel tanks buried under the concrete you park on. Installing those underground tanks is expensive, and it is absolutely not optional. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars per tank, before a single drop of fuel goes in. Then there's the concrete forecourt, the giant canopy overhead, and the pumps themselves. Each dispenser is its own expensive machine, wired, metered, inspected, and regulated down to the penny it reports. And you don't just build it once and walk away. Underground fuel tanks are some of the most heavily regulated private infrastructure in the entire country. Leak detection systems, constant monitoring, mandatory inspections on a schedule, compliance paperwork that genuinely never ends. Why so much oversight on a buried tank? Because of what's inside it, and what happens if it ever gets out. Hold on to that thought. Comes back later as the scariest number in this whole video. Now layer the brand on top. Most stations you drive past aren't independent. They fly a flag, a major fuel brand, and that flag comes with a contract. You agree to buy their fuel and only their fuel. You meet their standards. You follow their rules on everything from the canopy lights to the uniforms. In exchange, you get the name on the sign and the instant trust that name carries with every driver. That trust is worth something, but you're renting it. You don't own the name, you rent the right to stand under it, and you pay for that in the fuel you're locked into buying. So tally it up. Before you've earned 1 cent, you've paid for the land, the buried tanks, the pumps, the canopy, and the compliance systems. And the right to use somebody else's name. This is not a lemonade stand. This is heavy industry wearing a friendly, brightly lit face. And here's the cruel joke at the center of it. The product you built the entire operation around, the gasoline, is going to hand you almost nothing. Let's actually break down that gallon of gas. because the margin on it is the thing nobody believes until they see it laid out. When you pay at the pump, the biggest chunk of that price never belonged to the station at all. Roughly half of what you pay is the raw cost of the crude oil itself. Then add the cost of refining that crude into usable gasoline. Then add taxes, federal and state, baked into the number on the sign. By the time you account for the oil, the refining, and the taxes, the overwhelming majority of your payment is already spoken for. It was never the station's money. The owner is fighting over the thin sliver that's left. And that sliver is thin. The markup a station makes on fuel, the gross margin, tends to run around 30 to 40 cents a gallon in a normal stretch. That already sounds small. But we are nowhere near done subtracting. Out of that markup comes the cost of trucking the fuel from the terminal to the station. Then, and this one really stings, the credit card fee. Almost nobody pays cash for gas anymore. And the processing fee takes a real bite out of every gallon, because it's charged on the entire sale, taxes included. The owner pays a fee on the taxes they're collecting for the government. Let that sink in. Then keep subtracting. The electricity to run the lights and the pumps and the coolers all night. The wages, the insurance, the endless compliance. After all of that, what actually lands in the owner's pocket per gallon is measured in pennies. A few cents. On a good day. Here's how upside down your instincts are. Surveys have found a huge share of drivers believe stations make at least $2 in profit on every gallon. $2 whole. The real number after everything is closer to a nickel. Sit with that gap for 1 second. The thing you assumed was a gold mine is one of the thinnest margin products in all of retail. If gasoline were the entire business, nearly every station in America would already be dark. So the fuel isn't the profit. The fuel is the doorbell, which leaves the obvious question hanging in the air. If the money isn't out here at the pump, then where exactly is the house? Walk inside, past the door, past the racks of chips, past the roller grill and the coffee station and the humming wall of cold drinks. That room, the little convenience store you barely glance at, that room is the actual business. Here's the pattern that quietly runs this entire industry. Across convenience stores, fuel brings in around 2/3 of all the money coming through the door. It's the biggest number on the revenue sheet by far. But when you look at where the profit comes from, fuel is less than 40% of it. The store, that small room of snacks and drinks and coffee, carries the majority of the profit on a fraction of the sales. There's your first loop paid off. The product with the station's name on the sign is the worst earner on the whole property. The stuff you grab as an afterthought is what actually keeps the lights on. And it gets sharper. Inside that store, the most profitable corner isn't even the packaged goods on the shelf. It's the food and drink they make right there, the coffee, the fountain soda, the hot food under the heat lamp. That one category punches massively above its weight, delivering a slice of profit way out of proportion to how much gets sold. Let me make that concrete because this is the number that reframes everything. Picture a station selling a healthy volume of fuel, let's say 125,000 gallons in a month. At a net profit of around 5 cents a gallon, that entire month of pumping gas earns the owner about $6,250. From an ocean of fuel. From every car that pulled in, every swipe, every drop. Now look at a single cup of coffee. It costs the store somewhere around 30 cents to make. It sells for about $2. That's $1.70 in gross profit from 1 cup. An 85% margin on a product that's basically hot water and ground beans. Here's the equivalence that should stop you cold. To match the gross profit of that 1 coffee, the station has to sell about 34 gallons of gasoline. 1 coffee, 34 gallons. That's most of a full tank in somebody's truck, just to equal a single paper cup at the counter. That is the entire business, compressed into one comparison. Oceans of fuel for pennies. A cup of coffee for a small fortune. And the fuel exists mainly to walk you the 15 steps toward the coffee. The gas is the bait. The store is the business. And this is the exact same trick you've felt 100 times without ever naming it. Free shipping that nudges you toward the bigger cart. The cheap printer that survives entirely on outrageously expensive ink. The rock-bottom loss leader at the front of the grocery store that pulls you past everything with a real margin. Gasoline is the loss leader of the entire American road. It was never there to make money. It's there to make you stop. Now let's go back under the concrete. I promised you a number that can wipe out years of profit overnight. And here it is. Remember those big steel tanks? Steel corrodes. Seals fail. Pipes crack. And when an underground fuel tank starts to leak, the gasoline doesn't just quietly disappear. It seeps into the soil. And from the soil, it can reach groundwater, the water people actually drink. This is the single largest liability hanging over the entire business, and most drivers have no idea it exists. When a tank leaks, the owner is on the hook for the cleanup. And cleanup is not cheap. The EPA estimates the average cost to clean up a leaking underground storage tank site runs around $154,000. That's the average, the routine version of this disaster. When the leak reaches groundwater, the cost doesn't climb. It explodes. Cleanups that hit the water table regularly run past $1 million, depending on how far it spreads and how many neighbors it reaches. Now put that against how this business earns. If a station clears a few cents per gallon, how many gallons pay for one bad tank? Let's actually do it. That average cleanup, paid on fuel margin alone at 5 cents a gallon, takes roughly 3 million gallons of gas to cover. For a busy station, that's about 2 full years of pumping, 2 years where every gallon goes just to erase one single leak. And the $1 million groundwater cleanup? That's 20 million gallons. More than a decade of selling fuel, gone, to clean up one hidden failure. Here's what makes it even worse. Even a pinprick-sized hole can leak hundreds of gallons of fuel into the ground over a single year. Silently, invisibly, while the owner is up front selling coffee and thinking everything is completely fine. That is the hidden cost. That's the thing sleeping under the friendly canopy and the bright, glowing price sign. Those tanks are wrapped in so much regulation because one of them, failing at the wrong moment, can end the business and take the owner's savings with it. The doorbell doesn't just barely pay its way. The doorbell can burn the entire house to the ground. Now let's pull back, because there's a slow-moving force pressing down on this business that isn't dramatic like a tank leak. It's quiet, and in the long run, it might be the more dangerous of the two. Every single year, the average car goes a little farther on a gallon of gas. Fuel efficiency keeps creeping upward. And when cars sip fuel instead of gulping it, the country burns fewer gallons overall. Even if everybody keeps driving exactly as much as before, the numbers already show it happening. National gasoline consumption in the U.S. has started ticking down, and the government's own energy forecasters expect it to keep sliding in the years ahead. Mostly because cars simply keep getting more efficient. This isn't a prediction about some distant future. It's a trend that is already underway. Now add electric vehicles on top of that. In the U.S., there's still a relatively small slice of the road, a fraction of new car sales. And their growth here has been genuinely bumpy, with the incentives shifting around underneath them. So EVs are not the wrecking ball some people picture crashing into this business tomorrow. Not yet, but they are a second, growing source of pressure, stacked right on top of the efficiency trend that's already here. Put those two forces together, and you get a long, slow squeeze. Fewer gallons sold year after year on a product barely making money already. The doorbell isn't just cheap. The doorbell is getting quieter every year, which is exactly why the smartest owners stopped betting on the doorbell a long time ago and quietly doubled down on the house. Let me tell you about two people who bought gas stations the very same year on opposite sides of the same city. Call them Ray and Dana. Ray understood gasoline. He'd worked around fuel his whole life, and when he bought his own station, he ran it like a fuel business top to bottom. He obsessed over the pump price. He watched the wholesale market every single morning, shaving his margin to be a penny cheaper than the station across the street, chasing volume like it was oxygen. To Ray, the little store inside was a nuisance. A few dusty shelves of chips and a coffee machine he never bothered to clean. It was in there because stations were supposed to have one. That was the whole reason. Dana bought her station the same year with a completely different picture in her head. She'd studied the same numbers I just walked you through. She knew going in that the fuel was only ever the doorbell. So from day one, she treated that store like the real business it was. While Ray fought his penny wars out at the pump, Dana quietly built up the inside. She put in a real coffee program, fresh pots, decent cups, a couple of hot food options ready every morning for the commuters. She kept the store clean and bright so people actually wanted to come in and linger for a second. She learned which drivers stopped every day and what they reached for when they did. And for the first year or two, on paper, it genuinely looked like Ray was winning. His fuel volume was higher. More cars, more gallons, more noise, more motion. Dana's pumps were quieter by comparison. Ray would drive past her place and feel smart. Then the squeeze came. Fuel margins tightened during a rough stretch the way they always eventually do. And Ray had built his entire survival on the thinnest margin in the whole business. When gas stopped paying, he had nothing to catch him. He started cutting corners, then cutting hours, then falling behind on the very compliance costs that keep those buried tanks legal and safe. Dana barely felt the same squeeze. When her fuel margin got thin, it just didn't matter as much. Because the coffee and the hot food and the busy little store were carrying her the entire time. The doorbell got quieter for her too, but her house was full. Within about 4 years, Ray was done. Not because he was lazy, the man worked harder than almost anyone. He was done because he built his entire business on the one part of it that was never designed to make money. Dana's still open. She still sells gas at basically the same price as everybody else on the block. But that was never where she was making her living, and she knew it before she ever unlocked the front door. She figured out on day one what took Ray a whole career to learn too late. The sign out front is not the business. It's just the invitation. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, Max, but plenty of gas stations clearly do make money. I drive past busy ones all the time. And you're completely right. They do. But look closer at the busy ones, and you'll almost always find the exact same thing. A packed store, a strong food program, maybe a car wash humming in the side lot. The profit is pouring in from everything except the gas. You might also be thinking the fuel still has to matter somehow, and it does, just not the way you assumed. The fuel matters because it is the traffic. No gallons means no cars, which means nobody walking through that door toward the coffee. Fuel is essential and barely profitable at the very same time. That contradiction is the engine that runs the whole business. And maybe you're thinking this is just a weird quirk of gas stations. It absolutely is not. It's one of the most common structures in all of business. The thing printed on the sign is the hook, and the actual money lives one step deeper in the spot you weren't looking. All right, you know how it actually works now. So what do you do with that knowledge? The next time someone tells you a business is safe because everybody needs the product, slow all the way down and ask the real question. Does the thing everyone needs actually make the money? Because need and profit are not the same thing, not even close. Gasoline is the proof. The entire country needs it, and it barely earns a cent. And more broadly than gas, start noticing the doorbell everywhere. The rock-bottom subscription that only exists to sell you the upgrade later. The cheap game console that quietly makes its real money on the games. The nearly free product at the front of the store, designed to walk you back toward the profitable one waiting in the back. Once you can spot which thing is the bait and which is the business, you stop being surprised by prices, and you start understanding them. So here's where we landed. The gas station, the business everyone calls safe and simple, turns out to be neither. The product with its own name on the sign earns pennies. And it sits on top of a buried liability that can end the whole thing in a single night. That was the hidden cost I promised you at the start. The tank under the concrete, one quiet failure away from erasing years of a career. And the profit was never where the sign was pointing. It was inside the whole time, in the coffee, in the store, in the part you walk straight past. That was the other promise, the other loop. The one product that gives the business its name is the one that makes the least from it. Ray learned that too late. Dana knew it from the very first day. And the difference between them wasn't luck, or location, or hustle. Came down to a single idea held from the start. The gas is the bait. The store is the business. And once you can truly see that pattern, you'll start spotting it in 100 places that have nothing to do with gas at all. Because it is everywhere, running quietly underneath things that only look simple from the outside. Max, keep your eyes on the house, not the doorbell. I'll see you in the next one.